Hello and welcome back to the Transfer Flow. And on today's episode, we are rebuilding Tottenham Hotspur, starting with whether they should keep Ange Postecoglou and who could replace him, which underrated Premier League stars Spurs could pick up for peanuts, and we've got midfielders, attackers, defenders, possible signings for every position. That's all on today's episode of the Transfer Flow. Okay, so we are back for another big rebuild, and it is a big rebuild that we have on our hands. If Liverpool have excellent people behind the scenes and are probably having smart conversations, Spurs are probably trying to limit the amount of crime that some of their guys behind the scenes are doing right now.
Thank you.
Is that fair to say?
You just steaming pile of shit you've plunked us into once again, my friend. This is, thank you very much. So I will say that Spurs have been using data for quite a long time. And in fact, Ian Graham and Deck Tech were at Spurs like before Ian Graham was at Liverpool. So they have been like plugged into the data culture for a very long time, but they don't actually seem to use it that often. And actually one of the people that I really like in the football industry is a Polish guy that helped build Chorzo, I think. And then he went to work for Luke Bourne at Zealous for a while, and now he's there doing data engineering and I think like hardcore analytics at Spurs. So that it's not that they don't have the infrastructure, right? But Fabio Paratici and data are probably not the most comfortable pairing. In the same way that Mochi and data are probably not the most comfortable pairing. It's just that Mochi has a big data masters named after him, and Paratici hasn't managed to find that level of celebrity. How do you say? No, never mind. It's just going to get me in trouble. I'll leave it alone.
you were going to go. You're going to make it worse. With Monchi, look. I don't take away from Monchi's achievements in the game, but Monchi is a little bit like Monchi and his wife would go to France to buy cheap light cheese, and on the way he would watch a Ligue 2 game, and then he would sign that guy, and everyone was like, "This is the greatest genius that football has ever produced." Paratici is kind of like, I was in my cell and there was a guy in the next cell who had an interesting contact for me. But Paratici could be the guy who's picking the next manager. Actually, maybe that's where we should start.
Hang on.
Whether Spurs stick with Ange or not.
I would like to say that both of these gentlemen are very involved deal makers. I don't want to explain what deal making means.
Yes.
Some of it was in the newsletter.
They make deals. Yes.
They do. They make deals. They make sure that everybody gets paid. Let's put it that way.
Yeah, exactly.
So they're going to be influential potentially in making sure people get paid in the sales and the purchases this summer at Spurs. But as you say, the most important thing is, first of all, is Paratici coming back, because he's sort of been kind of not officially doing things behind the scenes because, he was banned for 2.5 years for accounting irregularities that he was adjacent to at Juventus. Spurs are a mess, though. So if he's been attached to Spurs, then the shine's a little bit off of that. And if he's not been attached to Spurs, then you're like, well, these are still the players that you put here for the most part. So I don't understand it. What I do understand is we should start at the very beginning, which is, where the fuck are they in the league table, and how weird has this season been? Because I think that gives you context for every other piece of analysis for Spurs.
I mean, where they are in the league table is low. Like, I think that their loss against Villa was their 21st of the season. I'm just going to check that right now.
No, I got it up. It's the 21st loss, but they are 17th on the table, 21 losses, 38 points, which is usually the threshold for relegation in less strange seasons. But I want to just say one statistic that makes it super weird. Their goal difference is +2.
Yeah, that is weird. Their expected goal difference is negative, though. Yeah, they've scored a lot of goals. They've scored 4 goals fewer than Arsenal, which is funny. They've scored the same number of goals as Chelsea. It seems like it's been quite a high variance approach, I will say, with Tottenham. The funny thing to me is that Tottenham and Manchester United are guaranteed to finish below Everton, which is kind of a staggering fact. And actually, if Wolves get a point from their remaining 2 games, then Tottenham will definitely finish below them as well. I just don't really know what to make of this. And like you were talking the other day about how maybe if Maddison stays fit the whole season, then Spurs are in better shape. But they still scored a lot of goals, and their complete inability to keep them out at the other end has really been the problem, right? Like, the defense has not shown any ability to adapt at all. Ange seems to have been, in his defense, due to a whole year of people telling him he's shit at his job, Ange has got more and more defensive over the course of the season and has really kind of entrenched himself. I guess he's entrenched himself rhetorically, if not actually as much tactically. Like, there were points in the season where he said, I'm not going to change what I'm doing, even while it was very clear on the pitch he was actually trying to change what he was doing.
That happened with set pieces last spring as well, or last summer.
Yeah.
He was like, no, we never do this. And like, clearly they started to work on set pieces because somebody who's a professional is very obvious that like, oh, these are coordinated and actually not terrible anymore. All right. So they have had one of the weirdest seasons that we have seen in the Premier League, alongside Manchester United, who also are having one of the weirdest seasons we've ever seen in the Premier League. The team's 16th and 17th in the table, 39 and 38 points. And the reason why it's so weird is not because of where they're at in the English Premier League table, but because one of these fucking teams is going to be a Champions League team next season.
Yeah. Spurs could end this enormous trophy wait in what has been the most calamitous league season they've had as long as I can remember, really. And it actually is a season for people to be ending title droughts, right? With Newcastle and Bologna, a bunch of teams across the continent have been doing this. But regardless of that, you do have to assess the managerial market out there. The squad is thin. The squad is undeniably thin, and we will come on to some players. But issues with their players have been exacerbated by the way they've played. So they have zero control as a team. They only look good when they're going 100 miles an hour. They seem to have no depth at all in particular positions where players are asked to do an awful lot. These are things that they could have tried to trade off tactically in the way that Liverpool have done, for example. And also a bunch of these players too are not just injured but injury prone. Like, when you signed Maddison, you knew that you were getting this guy who gets injured a lot, and you needed to have a plan to deal with that. They do not have a plan to deal with basically any injury to the squad right now. So
let's focus on the style for one, because I think that is interesting. And I think that actually the two North London clubs are really fascinating counterpoints for choices you would make in having injuries, right?
Okay.
Both teams had injury problems all season long. You would say the Spurs are more exacerbated. The Spurs had a much deeper injury list, partly due to this style of play. But one of those teams chose to be hyper conservative in the attack and obviously have a better squad. Let's not pretend that this isn't the case. But when their injuries bit, they went more and more conservative. And Arsenal ended up giving up 33 goals so far this season on 67 goals scored, plus 34 goal difference. Spurs have 63 goals scored, have given up 61 goals for a plus 2 goal difference. These two teams are, 33 points different in the table. And it all comes back around to the goals conceded and how they go about it. Now, when I look at this, I say it's really interesting that Ange has this style of play that has been quite successful in some places. We would now say that like they have had significant issues in the keeping players fit, and part of that is the style of play, the hyper aggressive style of play. Now it had big dividends in the first half of the season. You can't erase that. They were one of the best teams in the league and by expected goals in like the first 14 games of the season. So until like the injuries really started to catch up to them, that's what they need. But I don't think the squad and their budget at the same time can withstand that type of thing. And so now you end up in this situation where, okay, we've got Postecoglou, he's had a tough season as a head coach. Like, honestly, here's my question for you. Would you ever want to sit in a press conference every single week as like the person that had to answer the nonsense from the media?
Not if I wasn't allowed to tell them to piss off. Like, that's the only scenario in which it would be fun, right? When you can say, sorry, you work for the Sun, you don't matter to me. Sorry, you work for the Mail. I need you to read me a page of Harry Potter out loud right now because I don't know if you can read and write. Like, that kind of stuff. Like, that would be fun. But the actual trying to keep my job publicly, no. I don't want to do that.
Yeah, in every sort of public facing situation that I had as like a head coach of a Premier League team, like I'd be like, trans rights and like friend of Dorothy and like all the things that you see Pedro Pascal do. Like I would be that type of person as well. And the Mail and the Sun would adore me, right? Because that's what their readership is looking for. So I think that his job kind of sucks. Actually, I think that it's pretty miserable in a season like this. I'm not trying to defend him. I think that it's actually really, really difficult from an analysis perspective to separate the parts that have been. And I don't know what conclusion you come to. Now, usually in football teams, when you have this type of performance and you see everything going down and it's bad, you fire the head coach, because firing the head coach is the cheapest way to sort of rejig a potential new outcome. Most teams don't get new outcomes. Most teams end up doing the same dumb thing with a different cast of characters. Would you fire Ange regardless? Let's ignore the single final game against Manchester United, who are also bad. Would you fire Ange regardless of that result?
Yeah, probably. Yeah, probably. I think the performances have been declining lately. Like, even when they got fitness back, it didn't feel like the performance level has really had much of an uptick, which concerns me a little bit. There's also stuff that I think you can see on the field and in the numbers which do concern me. You know, like, this is a team, like, they're still not very good at playing out of pressure, for example, which I find kind of insane to me. I would like to just see evidence of, like, more tactical flexibility. Like, I don't know, like, it does feel a little bit harsh, and it's not like my principal issue with the team. But yeah, I think I probably would, especially because I think there are some good managers who are potentially available this summer.
Okay. I don't have a strong opinion. I think that you probably do get rid of him. It depends on what he's like working behind the scenes.
Yeah.
Like that actually has a big impact on on the regular. Hey, if your boss hates you, then you probably have a lower job expectation than other. And that's just part of working in football, because everybody's under a pressure cooker all the time. All right, so under the assumption that he's gone, then your whole rebuild is one of two things. Like, are you rebuilding for your next head coach, which is probably not a good idea because they're going to last approximately 2 years on average? Or are you rebuilding for a particular style of play that you would like to institute and have, you know, a series of head coaches that play this style of play, which I don't think that Spurs remotely have a concept of. I don't think, like, when you look at the head coaches that they've gone from to, like, there's nothing that ties these people together. And so that makes it even harder. So then you end up in a situation where your rebuild is focused on quality players that fit some level of quality that is slightly amorphous. And we're trying to get the best mix of parts for whatever our next head coach would like us to have on the squad.
Yeah, though I think on the plus side, there are at least some obvious holes, you know, like some obvious profiles missing from this squad, which I think you can address whoever's coming in. Like, we've been talking for ages about a defensively astute passing midfielder. Like, this is something they need. A flexible attacker is something they need. Centre-back depth is something that they need. Like, they can address those things. Admittedly, you know, the way your centre-backs play is going to vary a lot, but I don't think they're going to bring somebody in who just plays like deep block. These guys are going to need to be able to carry the ball a bit and pass the ball a bit. So I don't think that it's not like they're building, you know, towards a back three coach or something, and it's going to be a real problem for them. I think that they can build out the squad with some useful part, because even if our argument as well is that Ange has been kind of screwed over by a bunch of the injuries this season, then feasibly you can add a bunch of depth in key positions, and the team should be better next season regardless of who's in charge, in a way. Like, it's you just don't have that fragility anymore, or at least you can mitigate that fragility.
So you feel like they're going to sign Sean Dyche, is what you're telling me?
Would it be bad? Would it be bad? Look, if they sign Sean Dyche, that would be incredible stuff. But I mean, they're linked to a bunch of coaches who are pretty distinct. You know, like, there's Iraola, there's Frank, there's Glasner, there's Farioli, there's Hoeneß.
Farioli apparently is available right now. That's something that feels like, you know, depending on if he's got any sort of agreement with Ajax on like a gardening leave reserve clause or something, that feels a very Daniel Levy type thing to do.
Yeah, though it's, I don't know. Like,
well, look,
I don't know.
You couldn't have a more Spursy season than Ajax had.
So, yeah, okay. So they're doing profiling. They're doing like weak mentality profiling. It's like that's what we need.
I'm so glad I stuck that one in there. It was invisible
Jesus.
until it wasn't anymore. Right. So we know that they need some things, and in order for the Spurs fans who've stuck with us this long to get some level of payoff in this very tantric BDSM rebuild of the Tottenham Hotspur, we have to discuss some players that they potentially should be interested in.
Yeah, and also I guess we should talk a bit about the timeline. Like the aim, I guess, should be to be really good in kind of 4 years, 4 years.
3.
Yeah, that's when. Yeah, then at that point you've got Van de Ven will be 27, 28. Kulusevski will be 28, going on 29. They're very, very young guys. Will be about 22-ish. You know, Bergvall and stuff. That feels like about right. So I think you want to target guys who are 19 to 24, maybe 25 at the top end, as long as they're not too expensive.
Well, they were very punchy. So let's go back to last summer's recruitment. They were very punchy on their evaluations and prices that they paid for these young players in ways that I would not have been. And we pilloried Chelsea for doing things like this. We probably should have been slightly meaner to Spurs. Like that Archie, that Gray fee is huge. Yeah. 35 million for a teenager that kind of didn't look in place anywhere. But of course, he's a baby. Like that. They were very, very aggressive in thinking that they were correct, which is what usually gets you in trouble in making these transfers. Like you need to leave some level of pricing uncertainty in whatever you're paying. And maybe they did, maybe they didn't. Maybe we don't know what the full deal is on Archie Gray. Bergvall, I think, was good. And Kim actually is super Bergvall pilled, so, and has been the whole time. So, you know, it's not that there aren't tools that could work out pretty well, but there are also, I would have big questions if they rebuilt in the exact same way this summer as they did last summer, because then you're just like, look, you guys are buying lottery tickets every single season. And maybe this season is your biggest lottery ticket because you could still be in the Champions League next year, despite finishing 17th. I feel like you need to raise the floor on this squad right now. I feel like, you know, you can't go too young because you can't wait for them to all mature together and then hope you get a head coach that does things in the right way at the same time. I think they had some big hits like Lo Celso that missed, despite the fact that he was an excellent performer every single time that he played for Spurs and everywhere else, because he never really kind of got comfortable in England and no head coach truly believed in him. Dombele, you know, had other interest once he got his big contract, and now, despite that one looking like it was a pretty good one, maybe the background check on his attitude would have changed that. So I think you got to raise the floor, and I think you're right in that they do have some needs that we're going to start to throw out some names, but I would be very cautious in adding a lot of youth to this squad because I don't think that they can withstand it.
I'd also though be really open to selling pretty much anyone. I mean, not anyone, but like there are rumors about Romero to Atletico Madrid, for example. If that price is good, you should consider it very strongly. I know Spurs fans like Romero. I think he's decent. I think he's good even, but he's also a bit of a liability, and I don't think he's irreplaceable. Porro, similarly, like Porro's got pretty great attacking output. He's a good passing right back, but I don't think he's like an irreplaceable player. And if somebody offers real money for him, then I think that's a guy that you could consider moving on for reasonable money.
Can you make 20-25 million on each of those with a replacement that's not too different? Like as the 17th place team in the Premier League, you can't get too fussy about keeping anybody. You can get better pretty much almost anywhere. And I think that's true in the squad. Like Maddison was excellent, but could you get better in availability around that? Yeah, potentially. Yeah. So their best players are pretty good. And I would say their best players can be good at a Champions League level, but there aren't that many of them. And again, like even somebody like Solanke, who they paid full freight for last summer, like, oh, he's been a bit disappointing. Now, is he disappointing this year because of what's going on in the squad? Is he disappointing because he's not always available? Like, there are lots of potential reasons. Unpacking that from the Ange-ness of it all is a big challenge. And that's also what makes this rebuild difficult. I do like Brennan Johnson, though. I would like to say that, like, I think Brennan Johnson is really interesting, but I had to ask Kim, who is a Spurs fan, a very important question. Is Brennan Johnson dumb? Is he a bit thick? Because almost every other season, he's putting up really interesting goals and shot numbers. And every other season, he's putting up interesting creates goals for his teammates numbers. And like, clearly that means that he has the skill set to do both. But maybe his mindset is like only focused on one thing. Brennan can only do one thing and one instruction on the football pitch. And I'm like, oh, that must be like the most frustrating thing in the world. It's like, Brennan, you have eyeballs and you've proven in the past that you can create for your teammates. Like, you could shoot or pass at any particular shot.
No, I don't think he can do. No, he can run fast, score goal, or run fast, play pass. He's now a run fast, score goal guy. Like, that's fine. Brennan Johnson's a bit of a difficult player, I think, because he needs to rediscover that creative play. Otherwise, he's a bit of a wasted player in this squad. Like, he's just like the guy who arrives at the back post and taps it in, and that's great when you're playing on the break. But the rest of the time, like, what does that guy do?
Did you ever read the Pernow book about Pep's period at Bayern Munich, where he was talking about how Pep had to like deal with different players and the education levels. Now, the problem with a player who can do both things, run fast and shoot and score goal, but also need to be able to pass, is that like that level of optionality in the final third requires a footballing brain that's pretty significant. Ribéry was mostly just create for teammate. And he was the guy that Pep was like, you could give him 2 instructions and that was it. Meanwhile, Philip Lahm, you could give him the encyclopedia of football instructions and he would want more every single game. I think Brennan Johnson, like, you might only have 1 instruction, and that's a problem for Spurs fans, and it's a problem for their attack overall. It's not that the skill set doesn't exist there. It's just how do you unlock that in combination with everything else? Where do you want to start with the mentioning players?
It feels like we should go in midfield. Like, it feels like when we talk about Spurs, this seems to be the biggest area of the need that people talk about, despite the fact they've actually got a load of players here. So they've got some interesting kind of do-it-all youngsters. Sarr has not really made good on the promise he showed when he was at Metz, where he looked really exciting. Bergvall, like we talked about, really exciting, really young, some very, very promising carrying and ball-winning numbers, but he's a child. Archie Gray, don't really know if he's going to be a midfielder. Bentancur, he's only 27. He's 28 this summer, but I was surprised he was that young. But you can definitely think about moving him on, moving Bissouma on. I'd be open to whatever. They need a guy who can pass, at least.
I think Bissouma is the most disappointing from what I saw before he moved and what he actually does now.
And in France,
Yeah, and they also have another important question, which is like, are they going to activate the clause on Mathys Tel, who's in the attacking space? But we'll talk about that in a second. So I think Bissouma is a disappointment overall. This is where you're saying, hey, nobody is untouchable. Bentancur question, definitely need to pass, but pass from a position of does extra things. Like, somebody with Maddison, great if you're able to have both of them available on a consistent basis. Somebody that can kind of crash the box or fill in right behind, can get pressing regains, but somebody who definitely needs to be able to pass from midfield and open up these lanes for their attacking players that run real fast and shoot ball. Do you have anybody at the top of your list?
So obviously we should say today that this podcast is best consumed in conjunction with the newsletter, where Kim has also profiled a bunch of interesting players. And I was really excited that she talked about Soungoutou Magassa in her Spurs write-up, who I mentioned in the United video.
You're secretly, you're secretly a Monaco
I'm secretly
fan.
What?
You're secretly anti-tax, I think is what you are.
Look, I pay attention to anybody whose name is Adolf Hutter. I keep an eye on that guy. There's something in my blood that says, let's just keep a pin in what this guy's up to. Unfortunately, he's up to coaching. Look, I actually have got a Monaco guy for you. I think Lamine Camara is an interesting player for them. He's a good athlete. I think he's potentially great because he's 21. As Kim said in the newsletter, guys who are definitely just good are probably a bit of a waste of money for Spurs, except in certain positions, I guess. But if you're looking for a starter, they should be looking for high upside guys. And he is a really good ball progressor, but he's just a very active player. Like, he's pretty small, but he's wiry. He is the kind of guy who wins the ball a lot, but not by sitting and protecting the defense, but aggressively contesting the ball. And I think that can really help their press. If they have a bit more of a devastating counter press, then I think, these attackers are good enough that they can really pin you in. And I think he has pretty good instincts for when the ball can be won as well. I don't think he blocks anyone as well. Like, you could play him and ask him to do a lot of the mopping up defensively and play him alongside a passer, and that's fine. I think you could also play him alongside a more defensive option, ask him to do a bit more of the passing. I don't think you can use him as a lone pivot yet, but he's a better passer than most of Spurs midfielders. I don't think the price would be high. I don't think the wages would be high. I don't know if he's a superstar, but I think he's a very good player right now. And I think you're unlikely to lose money on this one, or at least lose that much money. So I like that.
We really liked Veerman for a couple of spots last summer. One of my worries about Spurs is taking guys from either the Dutch league or the Portuguese league, though. Like, I feel like they can't risk having more washouts physically. And both of those leagues, while the top are very good, like their competition factor, even through like the middle tier and the lower tier of the league, is really bad. So unless you were like rock star level of, hey, this guy's gonna be great. Like Veerman's 26 though, so like you can't overpay for anybody at Spurs. That's my take on all this.
Yeah.
Another guy that came up is a guy that was mentioned mostly for Liverpool last year because of the Arne Slot connections, which is Orkun Koku.
Yeah.
So he's been a Benfica attacking midfielder, does a bit of 8-10 type work. Again, pretty good passer, pretty good output. Not awesome in the Champions League, just kind of good enough. But, you're getting, with both these players, you do have Champions League level players that have some proven capacity to compete at a higher level. The one I was most excited by in the newsletter was Pepelu. But because so we're in Spain. Valencia have had super weird season as well, and then they've stabilized under Carlos Corberán, who I think, I'm not convinced on Corberán as like a manager or a head coach overall, but he's did what needed to be done at Valencia for their particular squad, and I think in Spanish maybe he's better at doing that. Yeah, my issue with this midfield is like you can't miss. And this is the one position that worries me the most of all the Spurs, because they've had so many misses for such a long period of time. You've got to find somebody that is going to be almost an ever present, that fits there every single week, that's like just at least 10 to 20% better than every other guy that they've got. And so, yes, you want to find the right player, but also you really cannot overpay, because they fucked that up many different times.
Yeah, but this is why I kind of am like, I'm more inclined to look in France or something.
Okay.
Like that's why I head towards someone like a Monaco player, because I think there are some stylistic similarities. Obviously, if you're changing coach, then there's a question mark. But these guys are used to defending in space, and they are good athletes. And I think that there's a limit to how useless they can be.
You know what's funny to me? You're talking about what French coaches or coaches in France. And we know that Ange is probably gone. Will Still, I think, would be like a really interesting appointment there.
Oh, yeah?
Yeah. So I mean, he's likely to go to Southampton, and Southampton are probably going to be easy mode next season. They've got a squad that's way too good for the championship. They're going to yo-yo. But like, if you wanted to take a chance on somebody that should be relatively cheap, that might be the right kind of guy, that also like might be able to move them forward culturally, it's much more like Will Still than it is somebody you're going to overpay for and hope that they don't flame out in 24 months. And also that type of thing where you're talking about knows physical players, knows how to get the most out of these types of players. Like, I think that that's a much more interesting case. And so you got me thinking on that one, as opposed to where my head was, which is just like, don't fuck things up.
Sure. Okay. Well, do you have a candidate for so Pepelu is like the passing type midfielder?
Yeah.
That is a really hard profile to find if you want somebody. I tried to find somebody a little bit under the radar for that, just because we can't talk about Stiller or someone who they're not going to get.
Right.
Again, there's a guy at Celta called Hugo Sotelo. He's 21 years old. He's a central midfielder. He has played not very much. He's got like 2,000 career minutes or something. But his passing numbers are really quite exciting. Like 7 final third entries a game, quite a lot of expected goals assisted. I think he was at like 0.2 per 90 this season, 0.12 this season. Like defensive actions, not that much, but there's some, and he's nearly 6 foot tall. He can dribble a little bit as well. Doesn't get dispossessed.
You know how I rebuild this team?
He's interesting.
Through the midfield, if I had to pick, like basically, I'm looking at 3 leagues, and maybe their next league's up. I'm looking at guys that are exactly the profile you said, so 20 to 23. But I only want to buy out of La Liga 2. I want to buy out of Ligue 2 or the bottom of Ligue 1, or I want to buy out of Bundesliga 2. I want to pay 15 million for these guys, and I want to bring in 2 of them.
Yeah.
Because the risk is we fucked something up. We didn't get the profile right. If I bring them in at the right price, then even if they wash out a bit, I can sell them back out for neutral, maybe even a small profit, totally fine. And that is how you have to go about sort of finding the right guy, unless it's a slam dunk, because there's too much fragility there in what they're doing. And Premier League teams often can't do this. But if you're buying from those teams, like Celta's pretty broke. So like that's another good example. But that's how I would go about from a process perspective to be able to do it. And some of the other guys we're going to talk about, defensive midfielder, kind of have that whiff about them where you're like, okay, find us a struggling club in one of these spaces or leagues where like we're not worried about their comparative ability, but we also just never overpay. We do a bunch of like cheaper deals that help us rebuild the floor, and then you could have a couple of hits out of that.
Well, this is where the Agoumé idea comes from, right? Which
I like
was
it.
also in the news. Sevilla are in disaster zone. They're not going to get relegated now, but they're going to take some real money for him. So when you say can't miss, what you mean is can't miss financially. Like
right.
We can't end up in the hole because of these players.
We can't spend 45 and big wages and get stuck again, which is what a lot of places are going to do if they're negotiating with Spurs. So what you need to do is you need to take a little slice of humble pie, eat a few of those bites, and then diversify your risk on the financial side while hoping that those players are good enough. And usually what has happened historically is that Ligue 2 and La Liga 2 have great players. We just don't necessarily see them until 2 years after they've moved into the league above and then shipped on to the English teams.
Yeah, there are always interesting midfielders coming out of France. Is basically my rule. My rule of thumb is if you want a young midfielder, look in France.
Yeah.
And there'll be a bunch of guys there. I mean, do you have any other names you want to mention here, or do you want to look at a different position? Because basically take some gambles on some young guys for fees that are not too crazy and see how you do.
Yeah, I think the problem, like even with what Kim was looking at, is like, we're happy to sort of give you the best options from a Monaco, a Porto, but those places sell well. And I just don't feel like Spurs have the ability to pay the prices you're going to pay out of there. And I have my own questions about how good any of these players are in that particular funky ass system or whatever they're going to end up as. So I would have to like diversify the risk. Now there are other places where I feel more confident. So I do feel I did like the we haven't talked about it in detail, but the Lucien Agoumé in Sevilla, like he's done a good job there. He's the right age profile. He's the right sort of size profile. Sevilla are super weird in recent times as well. Like they've been weird for quite a while, but particularly the last couple of years, they feel like they've massively underperformed where we'd expect them to be. I would not get a Johnny Cardoso out of Real Betis. No. I don't think that he's ready or that he raises your floor enough. And then so you diversify the risk there. And then there are a couple of guys that I really kind of liked, or that you can take more targeted risk in the attacking space.
Okay, well let's talk about attack then. Before we bring our players into it, Tel, do you make him permanent?
No, not at that price. I think you actually have to lower it by like 20 million.
That's exactly what I put in my notes. For 30 million, maybe.
It hasn't happened, and again, maybe that's the weird vortex for the second half of the season. But you also know what he's like behind the scenes, and so like you can have comfort level. Is that going to improve or not? Like, does he even want to be there? Is another question. Yeah. He's like, I was over at Bayern, and now I'm here. Like, well, if they make the Champions League next year, maybe that's more exciting. I don't know. It depends on what he's like and how much he's enjoying it. So I think that price has to go down a lot. It was always punchy, and that's why they didn't make the actual move. They wanted to do a try before you buy, and now I think they're probably quite happy with that.
But it might be interesting, of course, if it changes Bayern's mind. Like Bayern might look at this loan and think, "Ooh, okay, well, we're willing to move him on." Like shots are still kind of okay. They're about 2.8 per 90. Like he's 20 years old.
Yeah.
Like he just like his dribbling was just kind of nothing against Premier League defenses over the back half of this season. But like you say, team's a mess, adapting to a new league. He's a kid. There's lots to dream on, but I just don't have the information to like make this decision, and that means that I don't want to pay very much money. They're apparently negotiating to see if they can bring that price down. Who else do you want here? Because I've got a guy who's quite punchy.
Tell me.
I think you have to at least ask about Nico Paz. Do Spurs get him? Probably not.
Okay.
But he's a left footer on the right. He's a big guy, actually. He's like 6'1", which I was quite surprised about. He's 20. And he gets tons of shots. Like he's at like 3.6 shots per 90.
Talk to the folks. Where's he from? Why do they care about this? Because not everybody's as big a nerd as you.
Como got him in from Real Madrid's Castilla last summer. They paid about 6 mil for him. Supposedly Real Madrid retain a buyback, which is about 12 million. So maybe they just do that, but they've got enough guys that they need to work out what they're doing with an attack that maybe you just get lucky and they don't do it. They've got to figure out what they're doing with Brahim, Rodrigo, Arda Güler, Endrick. So you might just get lucky here. And I think that if they don't exercise that buyback, Como are probably going to be pretty open to taking a big profit on him now. If, say, Real Madrid retain that buyback in the following summer or something, I think they'd much rather sell him for 30, 40 or something now. There are other teams who are linked, like Arsenal, Inter, Liverpool, but I don't know how highly he ranks on their priority list. And if nobody jumps, kind of like what happened with Lo Celso and Nobele, a long time ago now, Spurs were able to get those guys because they were linked to a bunch of teams, but those teams were like, well, we'll come back to them later in the summer if they're still available. And Spurs just went hard and got them immediately. The thing about Paz is in his first season, in Serie A, he's at about 0.5 expected goals and assists per 90. That's also, Serie A is a deep league right now. Like there are lots of good to decent teams. So you've seen him against real opposition. He's high pass accuracy, which I like to see in a forward like this. He's a left footer who plays on the right.
Yeah.
Super, super valuable. He's also creating loads of chances off take-ons. He's passing into the box a ton. He's creating a lot of chances full stop. Tons of dribbles. He's at like 2.3 dribbles per 90, I think, and over 50% success. So, and his defensive work rate is really high. Like there aren't really major holes in his game except shot quality. And his shot volume is so high that I'm kind of like, boo-hoo. I don't really care that much because Son is aging out and certainly is aging into more of a facilitating player than a shot-getting player. I would quite like to have a player in this position who has a proven ability to put up decent shot numbers from a wide position. And who knows, maybe you even think he can play a more central role. But I love the player.
I feel like Fabregas has been playing him as a Fabregas type role. So he's been tucked in a lot, seeing a lot of like central midfield, attacking midfield in a way that we don't see outside of Italy. It feels like Italy have box crashing 8-10s that are allowed to shoot on site. And McTominay has sort of been able to blossom into that role, even though I still think that was a pretty terrible payment from Napoli in the summertime. Like you can appreciate what the player has done without having to appreciate the price paid for the player. I think you're right on the timing of the deal. He's also played a ton, 30 plus 90s in that league. I think you might be right. I'm not sure how awesome he's going to be as a wide forward in the Premier League. So that's one of my big questions. I would go. So I've been super cautious about recommending a location for this particular player.
Yes.
But I think that Spurs should probably go for Cherki. I think that they need that type of player. I think that they can absorb the risk for that type of play. Like, what are you gonna fucking do? You're gonna get relegated? No. So
Sure.
so as long as you don't overpay, you can bring him in. Like they've got Richarlison and guys like that already. It's not like Spurs
Hmm.
don't have guys that are like a little dodgy on some of their personality and how hard they might work. And if you're looking for somebody mercurial that could like Jack Grealish the shit out of the league for a bit and drag you forward, maybe it's him. Maybe it's here.
Do you worry about his athleticism at all, though? Because I look at him sometimes and I think, yeah, I feel like I love Cherki and he is a great attacking passer and he's got a real array of talents. But sometimes I look at him and I think, this is sort of how I felt about Sancho, where I was like, look at all the shit this guy can do. Like, he's a can't miss player. And then he arrived at the Premier League and he was like, maybe just not fast enough and just not strong enough. And he could only do kind of 40% of what he could do before. Cherki's playing deeper. So that worries me a little bit less. I think he can pop up kind of wherever and make a difference. But that is apart from the personality stuff, that is my worry about Cherki, I guess.
I think that he's good enough in small spaces that
Mm-hmm.
he'll succeed for some team in the Premier League.
Mm-hmm.
That's my perspective. Now, is he going to do everything that you need for like a 55 million move? No, I think that there's too much risk involved in that. Like he doesn't have that elite speed over space to be able to create that. But I think Spurs have enough of those guys, and they also like to play
Yeah.
on the break that they're able to do that because he's so good in smaller spaces, and because he's also so good at finding and creating for other teammates. Like that does seem to be like his best area that he has excelled in over time. Like I have less worry about that. I do have worries. Like let's not evaporate that concept. I have worries about him. I have worries about his athleticism, but I also think that somebody, if they get priced in, should take a risk on that. And I think
Oh, yeah.
Spurs is one of those teams that we would say they need to take a little bit of gamble on somebody like this, as opposed to like an overpriced midfielder who you're not sure is actually going to improve your midfield. That's where you need to pay less and get a couple of options and hope they pay off.
Yeah, I agree. Like the thing is, if Cherki, the price, I think people are now talking about 30 is the last thing I saw. If it's that, then like sure, why not?
It was like 20 last year, and then he signed like a new contract and sort of pushed himself back to the fore. I mean, I don't know what that is, right? And Lyon, we know, have to sell. Like nobody knows what's happening in that weird place.
But that's straight up a possible world beater that you could get. My one thing is, I'm worried about them building a front line with Johnson aside, not that much pace. Kulusevski is a great athlete, but he's a great athlete because he's a powerful runner. He's a great athlete, like De Bruyne is a great athlete, I think. But they don't have that much like game-breaking pace out wide. They don't have that much explosivity, and I would like to see a little bit more of it.
Yeah, but I just don't think that they can find it this season
sure.
in the budget, because like everybody needs that right now. Everybody's like pace. There's a period of time where we could not sign black players for Brentford that played in attack. And the reason why is not because we were being racist. We had all the scouting. We wanted to sign them. We could not afford them because everybody knew that the black players were fast and the white players were like potentially a little less likely to be fast. And so the scouting prices went up on them, and it was impossible for us to afford. It was insane.
When you say everyone knew this, do you mean that like it was like the racist understanding of the football world where they're just like, yeah, black players, those guys can run, right?
They were obviously strong and fast and could run, and so they had higher price tags than the white guys. So when we found white guys like La Saviba that were also fast, we were able to sign them, but it was so hard for us.
Oh my god, what a great sensible world, the football world.
I mean, in some cases, the stereotypes are true, or in some cases people just buy into the stereotypes and you hope that they're true. But yeah, it's weird. My actual sort of favorite player that I would like Spurs to get is not going to be possible for them. So I've been Ansgar Knauff pilled because I think Frankfurt are like a really interesting team.
Yeah.
But they're not going to get him because he's not moving this year and they have too much money. And they also, I think, backdoored into the Champions League in Germany as well. So they can keep their pieces. They're selling off, different players. But I really think that his like versatility and his thoughtfulness about like how he chooses his moments is some dude that I'm excited by. Kim had him in there as well. But I think between Marmoush and Ekitike going, like they'll keep him around and then they'll rebuild and see how good they are next year.
Yeah, that would be really exciting. It was really nice to see that conversation about him. There's also a guy, I mean, he's less of a forward, but as an interesting kind of link player between midfield and attack, there's Romano Schmid at Werder Bremen.
Oh my God.
Yeah.
So
whose passing numbers have like gone poof this season.
He's been on scouting lists for us since he was like a teenager. Like so many different times that we've had him as a potential move and different places that he could go. And sometimes you don't know if like he hasn't moved and worked out because of the situation, and sometimes you don't know if like they've hit their ceiling as a player. So yeah, he's been around forever, much like Stan the man.
Stan the man
Was also on lots of lists. I think Spurs have whoever is coordinating for recruitment for Spurs this year has a really hard job in front of them. I think you need to get rid of whatever chaff that you can get rid of. I think that if you make the Champions League, you actually just reload for the Premier League. You don't try to go for triples and home runs. Like you need to hit a lot of potential doubles and keep all the costs in line, because that's how you're going to get yourselves from 17th back up to 6th. And then once you're up in 6th regularly and you feel like you've got the core and you understand like what the process looks like, that's when you can start to swing for the fences once in a while. Last season, they swung for the fences in the summertime way too much. Like they paid too much money for either prospects that were really young, hoping that they'd be the next great thing, or they topped out with Solanke, like, sort of thinking that everything was going to be great. It hasn't worked out that way this season. Whoever the head coach is, like this is a pretty big squad rebuilding effort because they aged into some awkward situations, or they just have injury prone players that you kind of have to manage them, whether you get them outbound or you just like, hey, we're going to get 2,000 minutes from them in the league and then some competitions. I don't know.
Oh, I agree. I think that Spurs need to be careful not to get into the like 2013 Everton situation where it feels like they are sometimes like some of their fans who are just like, well, we would never sell Romero. And I think, yeah, I do remember Everton saying this about Barkley, about Stones. They held on to these guys for too long. And they also had this attitude of, well, we're just going to get the one or two big signings and it'll propel us into contention. Spurs just need to be sensible for a little bit. Like I was looking at centre-back options and I thought, yeah, like you can go and do something really punchy, but you could also go to Chelsea, who are probably going to be willing to make some sales, and say, how much do you want for like Trevor Chaloba, who is 25 going on 26, and I think is an excellent player and has been excellent under multiple coaches and would be great for them. Like would honestly be a really good signing for Spurs, and probably not that expensive because Chelsea are going to be in trouble with UEFA, like I say. These kinds of players, I think, are smart. Like just take some risks on this. And I want Spurs to produce some people from out of nowhere. I think that would be a really fun summer. Bergvall being produced from out of nowhere, super exciting. So I don't know. I mean, do you have any other players that you want to talk about before we go?
I think with Spurs, like again, you could talk about tons of different players because they're so bad. Like United was so difficult to talk about because there were just too many potential players that would improve them. I think the other thing that I would do with Spurs is yes, go to the teams that have too many players potentially and look for bargain hunt and get deals done early as well, because that changes your leverage and negotiating position, which is something that Daniel Levy does not do. But I think in the modern age, what you see is like, if you don't get things done, like the prices don't seem to come down much at the end of the window. They just roll them into potential loans that then have fees. And you see a lot of teams sort of sticking to their guns, which is not the right way to go about it. The other thing I would do is a bit like you almost recommended, I thought you were going to, like hunt for the one or two best players on every single one of those teams that were relegated this season. Like give me one or two of those guys that, want to play up in the Premier League. They're going to agitate to keep up in the best league. They're going to be way too good for the championship anyway. And can we give them 20 million for those guys? Not 100 million like Tyler Dibbling, or even 50 million for Tyler Dibbling. That's just too much money that you're hoping a teenager's going to graduate into something. But give me a guy that's 23, like a Harwood Bellis that we liked last summer as well,
it's great.
and put him in, plunk him in there. Like, again, we talked about Brentford got Ethan Pinnock from the Football League. So, there are guys you can get that will fill these roles if you're clever enough to take a little bit of risk. I do love Nathan Collins, though. I think Nathan Collins is pretty great. So
yeah, man, he's been flying this season. But
yeah,
the good thing about some of these players is they've whoever you hire, they've already paid for your next coach. Like, you go and get Trevor Chalobah, he's paid for future Spurs coach Graham Potter, future Spurs coach Oliver Glasner. Nathan Collins paid for future Spurs coach Thomas Frank. All these guys will presumably manage Spurs at some stage.
Who do you think they should get for their head coach?
Oh, Jesus. If I say Thomas Frank, you're going to call me a Frank pervert, as usual. If they want to be fun, they could go for something like Hoeneß. I think that would be fun. I think you at least have to talk to Glasner, but Palace are going to drive a hard bargain there. Frank, I think, is a pretty safe option. And if what we're talking about here is like rebuilding, getting a bit more versatile, not fucking up in any major ways, Thomas Frank is a pretty good candidate for that job. I also think that given the way that Ange has struggled with the scrutiny this season, one of the things I like about Frank is I think that he will just be okay with that. Like, I think he's an excellent speaker. But like, I'm open to whatever. I don't really care. Like, if they want to do Will still, like, go ahead. Like, fill your boots. What do you think? That's what people turn up here for, Ted.
I like Frank as an option for them. I've loved Glasner as an option for teams for a while.
Yeah.
So I thought he was a good one, but I don't like Palace are tough to deal with. Palace are actually in the same situation that Spurs used to be, which is that they always seem to have a couple of players or a coach every single summer that people want, and they're able to drive really tough bargains. I still think they should have sold Gahey last summer, but now that they've won their first title ever, or their first trophy ever, then they're like, well, look at that. So, a little bit afters on that one. I think, Ferrioli was an interesting potential guy. I'm not sure that the scrutiny there is going to be comfortable for him, but maybe he's like, I've had things lit on fire in the Netherlands. So like, clearly North London's not going to be that big a deal.
I don't want them to do Farioli.
Because you like him?
No, I just don't want more. I honestly, kind of the opposite. I just don't want more possession conservative guys in the Prem. I think we've got kind of enough of this type. I want psychos.
Okay. I don't know what Will still is, but I would look forward to just the random factor there. But I do think that, my coaching on this whole rebuild is lower your expectations, raise the floor, and give yourself backup plans for everything that you're doing this summer. Like, that's what you have to do when you then rebuild the core and some of those guys hit really well and you haven't overpaid for any particular other guys you can move on. Then you can bring yourselves back up to kind of your natural position that goes alongside what your wage bill looks like. I'm not trying to duck and dodge the questions on players. I think that, there's lots of players that they could potentially get to improve it. I think that I would just be super careful about like spending for players that you would get naturally excited by. You want people that are under the radar that could be hits, that then you're like, oh, 2 years ago we had 5 scouting magic tickets hit, and now we're back in the Champions League because that's what actually happened. And that is a fairly frequent story that we've seen happen over and over again, but you've got to be super disciplined to be able to do it, and you have to have the insight to find those players in the first place.
Well, let's see what Spurs do this summer. It looks like they're going to take some big swings. Paratici is not known for his playing it safe, as we know. Look, we need your input on the teams that we're covering. We'd love to hear about the players who you think would be an interesting fit for Spurs. We'd love to hear about the teams that you want us to cover in our rebuilds this summer. We will be bringing you more of these over the coming weeks, and we really want to thank you for your support on them so far. The Liverpool one has been going to the moon. Make sure that you're subscribed to the newsletter as well. Like I say, these podcasts are best consumed in conjunction with the newsletter, where there's, in my opinion, some of the smartest football writing available to you for free right now. It's crazy. Ted, anything else that you want to say before we get out of here?
If you're interested in our track record, go back and look at the transfer grades then and the commentary that we wrote in the transfer flow. Like, put into your search engine the transfer flow, transfer grades for any team that you want to look at, and you'll see them there. I'm pretty proud of the work that we did. Like, the places we were skeptical, we were very right to be skeptical. And the places we were really positive, we were mostly like spot on. And it's very difficult to get this right year after year, but that's what you listen to us for. Thanks for joining us.
See you later. Bye.
Was it weird for you when you first started meeting people that you'd seen on television before, and then like you're like, oh wow, this is like a thing?
It wasn't that bad because like my first jobs, I was like a runner for film companies, and so they would be like, "Can you take like a bottle of like champagne to like Benedict Cumberbatch's house?" And it was so like, "Don't be fucking weird, like just be normal." And so I think I got it, but also I just come out of like a uni experience where I was like, "I'm never going to be impressed by these motherfuckers ever again." So I wasn't too bad about it, I think.
Do you have a Tilda Swinton story that explains your fandom, or you just like love how she does her work?
Yeah, I just love her work. I just think well, I am actually okay. I'll talk about that another time. But I am kind of working. I am working on a connection at the moment. There's a guy at my gym whose name I won't say. But he is an actor, and I think I can connect to Tilda through him. So that's my project for the year, because he's a dad. He's a similar age to me. Like I think like we talk a bit at the gym because we always want to use the same equipment.
Is this the British version of 6 Degrees of Kevin Bacon? 6 Degrees of Tilda Swinton?
Yeah, but I think it's less impressive in Britain, right? Because literally everybody in this country is like inbred from the same 5 noblemen like, who just like fucked everything in the Middle Ages. So it's less exciting than it is in the US.
I didn't expect you to like open up the podcast by star fucking the Cumber Beast, but here we are.
Yeah, I did. I love the hot Spurs. I love it when they're good. That's my favorite shit. I've actually got nothing against Spurs whatsoever. Like they annoy me a bit because they're so incompetent. But like, I think it's one of those things when you're a fan of a club but you're not actually from the place that the club is. You just don't really have the same rivalries.
I ended up following a lot of Americans that ended up being Spurs fans, and they had like a couple of good years, and where Arsenal were particularly terrible at the same time. That was it. Now they're just mostly quiet and terrible again. So, I mean, no one expected this level of terrible.
No. What is it now? 21 losses in the league?
Is it really? Jesus Christ.
Yeah, it's a lot. I think it's 21 for them. I think United are at 18. If United lose on the last day to Villa, then they'll have lost half their league games, which is incredible stuff. Yeah, it's always weird to me that like Americans, a lot of Americans went for Fulham or like Spurs or whatever because of American players,
right?
I guess, which is strange to me because I've never really seen that as a way into supporting a team. But...
Yeah, it was Brian McBride at Fulham, who was sort of a big kind of prototypical center forward type. And then was it Dempsey and like DeAndre Yedlin were the combination at Spurs that converted like a whole generation?
Well, and Dempsey at Fulham as well. And Rayner was at Fulham, was he not?
Oh, was he? I forgot about that.
I think he was. And Friedel.
That's Friedel, right. Friedel was one of the early ones. Yeah.
Maybe I'm forgetting some people.
The Albatross, that was Friedel's nickname.
That was my my nickname for Jozy Altidore was always the big tuna, because like in my mind I couldn't not call him Albacore. Like so,
I love it.
So I was like Jozy Albacore, the big tuna. But no one ever understood this. I just said it to myself.
I think of Jozy as the bow tie of sadness. Back in the early days,
I remember that.
I would do radars of players, and we were starting to like coin these different archetypes of shapes that they were creating. And Jozy had like the worst shape I've ever seen in my life. As like just like a little bitty bow tie of like stuff that he did barely. So yeah, the bow tie of sadness.
That takes me back. You saying that? Those are like the early days of me reading Stats Bomb. Yeah. Oh, Jozy, what guy.
That was 11 years ago.
I was a slip of a boy. I was so young.
Yeah. You were mid-20s?
You were actually young. I was 24. I was approaching my 25th birthday.
I was still in my 30s.
Cool.
Ancient. Yeah, okay. I cannot believe it. So here's the incredible thing. Not only... Why don't we just do this as the podcast? Never mind.